All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of the lab. So on part 2 and 3, they're very similar to each other in that we're going to be mixing unequal masses of hot and cold water. So in part 2 today, we are gonna add more hot water than we add of cold water. So I'm gonna first start by measuring out 120 milliliters of my hot water. It might have cooled off a little bit since part 1, so I would not assume the same temperature as on part 1 as well. Okay, so here is 100 milliliters, and we're gonna add an extra 20 milliliters here. Ignore the little part that I've already spilled. Oops. Make up for right here. Okay. Okay, so here's 120 milliliters. Go ahead and stick the thermometer in there and get a temperature on that. Well, we get a temperature on the hot water. I'm going to measure out our cold water. So for our cold water bath, we are gonna only use 80. This last time we used 100 of each. This one we're using 120 of hot and only 80 of cold. So again, in the beginning of this, you guys should have made a prediction on unequal masses if we use more hot than cold and if we use more cold than hot. Okay, so it looks like our hot water has stabilized at about 56.2 degrees Celsius. And if I go ahead and move this into our cold water, which we have less of, we're gonna let that go down, see what the temperature is. Again, you guys should have already made a prediction as to what you think is going to happen when we mix more hot water than cold water. Okay, so this water again has been sitting in the ice a little bit longer, so it's cooled off a little bit more. So again, we shouldn't use our original temperature that you guys used on part 1. You guys want to use the temperature and assume your prediction based off that. So we're cooling down. We are at about 6.5 degrees Celsius. So from here, I'm going to go ahead, add my hot water. And we're going to mix those two around. And see what happens when we add more hot water than we do cold water. So again, this is unequal masses with more hot water than cold water. So part 2. So on this one, we came up with about 34.7 degrees Celsius. In part 3, we're gonna look at what happens when we use a little bit more cold water than hot.